Should I also add you? Pallavi, at least somebody. Okay. All right. So yeah. So this is one problem, that you can never falsify it, because we can keep on arguing that maybe you did not attend too much or as much as you needed to on the spoon, and hence you are not able to bend it. The other problem is in defining, or what we call operational definitions. Operational means how do you operate on that? I started a new meeting. We stop this. Sorry. Thanks. Okay, so both of these are problems. One is it's not falsifiable. Second is you don't have clear operational definitions of what you mean by. Maybe should I just mute every? Yeah, just keep yourselves muted, please, when you don't have to talk. And from there, we did this exercise in the last class about figuring out which can be falsified or not. And most people agreed that what was it? D, I think. Which of the following can be falsified? D is something that we can falsify through observation. A we can't falsify because it is somewhat based on individual preferences or judgments or tastes. B we can't falsify easily because perhaps we don't know what is violent or how to define violent and what are the different measurements of violence across history. Many of them are lost. C is again pretty complicated. This is time itself, and we don't have a good theory about how time can run backward as well as forward. D, there are planets other than Earth that have water on them. So one way to falsify that is to find other planets, which technically we should be able to do, and see if they have water or not. If you say there are planets other than Earth that do not have water on them, then versus when you say there are planets other than Earth that have water on them, the set of possible planets that you have to consider changes for falsifying this statement, of course. So some of the statements to falsify have much more costs involved compared to other kinds of statements. So falsifiability also sometimes has an extremely high cost. And if it has a very high cost, then probably either we don't try to falsify it because it's a humongous cost, or sometimes it's not even possible to do because the costs are so high that we are better off without trying to falsify it. While other times we are typically able to falsify a lot of statements in science in general and also in psychology. So the self-help books, when you read them, please see who has written them. And most of the self-help books are written by people without having expertise or at least without well defining the terms that they're using in the book, and also not providing enough scientific evidence about the hypothesis that they are generating, including the one that I mentioned, which many of you have already read about, which is a big danger. And the biggest problem that we face when we teach psychology is that most of the time, including those kinds of claims that are mentioned in those kinds of self-help books, seem to be treated as psychology. It's clearly not scientific psychology. And so we have to say what is scientific psychology compared to something else, which is not scientific psychology. That we will try to achieve in this lecture. And also I will talk or have to talk around two words which has been discussed already by some of you.
So,
for A, which is subjective versus objective.
Sir, a
Yes,
question. So, for the D part here, there are planets other than Earth that have water on them. Do we find planets that do not have water, or those that do have water to falsify this claim?
you only falsify when you find one instance which do not support this proposition.
Okay, so we okay, all right.
One instance, and that is falsified. You don't have to have multiple instances of falsification.
So, sir, why is that not applied in the individualistic case, where we can find, let's say, one individual for whom, let's say, pasta may taste better?
Oh, because it's not about the individual, it's a normative statement.
Right. Okay.
So the whole world data, if you, so this is one classic example where if you have to falsify this, you really have to collect data from every single living person on earth. But still, what is the norm? So would you say that the average is the norm, or the majority is the norm? So there you will have questions about normativity, which makes it challenging.
So does a falsification must require a scale to measure that? Like sir, in option like in B, sir, you have said that we live in the most violent time in history, so we don't have any scale to measure it. Sir, so in A, sir, chocolate tastes better than pasta, sir. We don't have any scale to measure taste between chocolate and pasta. So how can we prove it?
Yes, one is scale, and it is also tied, because it's taste, it's also tied with individuals. I mean, some things are normative in taste also. Say, for example, chilies are hot,
Yes,
is a
yes, sir.
state. So can you falsify it?
Sir, we have a scale for Scoville units. So with the relative, yeah, we can falsify. We can say like ghost pepper at 150 or 180 Scoville units. So we have a scale. But sir, comparing between chocolate and pasta, we don't have a scale like that. So how can we say that it can't be
No, the
falsified?
hotness, you are mentioned to the hotness scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
For chilies.
Yes, sir.
That's also a problem, because that scale is not objective completely. So the units that is measured, on which the hotness is measured, they are not completely based on chemical composition. And in fact, the problem with any food is whatever chemical it is based up with, it has to interact with the taste buds.
Yes, sir.
So we have some kind of relative hotness scale, which is used internationally. There, I don't know if you know, the chilies from Northeast India is one of the topmost in the scale. And there are some more in Mexico. I think some chilies which are highest on the scale, but
Yes, sir.
it's it's still better one because it's still chili, but it's hotness.
Yes, sir.
So one is scale, and the other is the subjectivity associated with tastes themselves. Both of which makes it a difficult thing to falsify. Because who knows, you can eventually engineer a tongue which does not feel um, hotness, or you can train a person, and there are actually levels of people who are able to digest a lot of hot taste, even based on culture and state that they live in, even in our country. So
Sir,
whenever, yeah,
sir,
yes,
if sir, for example, if we consider the example that drum sounds louder than trumpet, so sir, this statement can be falsified or not because we have a specific scale in decibels on which we can calculate the loudness, or even that is also a uh, individual thing which a person perceives the sound.
no.
So
So
what?
decibels, lumens, and all that are physical scales, right? Whether you hear it or not, it will give out the same decibels.
Okay, sir.
Or when you have light, again, if you see it or not, it is going to give you the same lumens. So
Sir,
here
in
you have
the
a scale, and you don't necessarily need subjectivity. Both are true.
so in the fourth statement, isn't it that to falsify it, we'll have to show that all planets don't have water? Because the statement is that there are planets other than Earth which have water. So to prove it true, we just need to find one planet which has water.
Yes.
So to falsify, we'll need to show all planets that they all don't have water.
There are planets other than Earth that have water on them. So you have to find a planet other than Earth which does not have a water on them.
No, but it's saying that like there are planets other than Earth that have water. So if we find a planet with water, then that's going to be true. But
Ah.
if there are 100 planets in total, and if we check 20 of them and they don't have water, but we still don't know if it's false because there might be more planets which have water, then it will prove the statement true. So shouldn't we have to check every single planet to that if it doesn't have
So
water?
the set is not a problem in falsifiability as a theory. So even if it is an infinite set, it does not, it does not by definition mean that it is not falsifiable. It might require infinite amount of time, but still it's theoretically possible to falsify. What this is asking is what cannot be falsified. So it's not about time or it's not about resource. There are some things which just cannot be falsified, however much amount of time or resource you give. That is why
Oh,
D is actually used as to show that it's not really about the set size.
okay. So infinite sets also it doesn't matter if it just wastes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So how can we say that concretely that yeah, this is the statement and it can't be falsified?
Which one?
Sir, how can we explain any like statement like concretely like yeah, this can't be falsified? So what are the conditions for that, sir?
So you need to have a proper measurement. You have to also define some kind of um, process through which you will be able to pick the next and then test this proposition on them.
Yes, sir.
So you would need a scale. You would also need the candidates on which you are going to test it. And it should not be tied to something which people can claim on their own. So it should not have some kind of individual position, subjective position, which is true for A, and which is also true for this magic question. I'll have one more example. So, you know, um, one issue with um, with many theories is that, say, let's say um, some people have this fascination towards being perfect about everything that they do. Okay, whether it is about building up your body, or whether it is writing an essay, or even whether it is about cutting grass. You'll have to mute, please. Yeah, everybody. Otherwise, we'll have to. Pallavi, see if it's required, we can mute everybody, and then somebody wants to speak can put their hand up, and then we can unmute if there's too much of noise.
Okay.
So for perfectionism, one theory um, that was given is that maybe you had something in your childhood, or you went through some kinds of experience in your childhood, which is why you have become perfect when you are, or you have an obsession towards being perfect when you are an adult. Now that's a problem as a theory, because it's very hard to falsify it. How do we go back to the childhood? How do we pick the experiences that did lead to me being a perfectionist in my adulthood? This is a psychological theory, but it's a problematic one. And it's a theory which is a bad theory because it does not have good hypotheses which can be falsified. Okay. So even in psychology, it's not just in magic or in self-help books. Even in psychology, we have bad theories or incomplete theories or not so good theories, which do not have clear hypotheses that can be falsified. And one such theory um, comes from the psychoanalytical tradition, where a lot of the explanations of adulthood is given by resorting to perhaps experiences of childhood without a proper way to measure them and without a proper way to falsify it. It's a bad theory because how do I prove it false? how can I go back to my childhood and have a different experience so that I have a different childhood? It's impossible to do. So it's basically a non-falsifiable theory. The other issue that I want to pick is, to measure perfectionism, many psychologists use something of rating scales, and rating scales are very common in psychology. They're sometimes also called Likert rating scales after Likert. So typically, people are asked to rate their own judgment or position on a scale, which basically means that you have to convert something in your head to the scale. So if I ask you, how much of a perfectionist do you think you are? Now that involves me thinking about myself, which is metacognition, about how much of a perfectionist I am, and then I convert it to a numerical number, 100%, 50%, 10%, for 20%, whatever, and then I have to respond to a scale. Now this is again, whatever you get in the scale essentially is a non-testable or non-falsifiable output. There's no way for me to falsify it. If you say, well, I'm a perfectionist, how am I going to falsify it? So the point is, this problem of falsification and the problem of, even in scientific psychology, we have lots of issues, including ways people use in their measurements that don't lead itself to falsifiability, and hence make psychology not so much of a hard science. There are some people who do it, and they try to employ different methods to it, which are, taken to be well accepted methods in science, in psychological science, but still there are weak as methods to be called science, and hence they fall under the area of social science. So yes, there is science, but there are these gaps, and there are these issues, and there are these different methods, and there are bad theories, there are hypotheses and assumptions that cannot be tested in the field itself. Of course, there are things outside the field, like the self-help example that I said, but even in the field there are this, and we have to guard against it. We have to make theories which are better off, that anybody can falsify. We have to have data that anybody can falsify. That is how we are going to build up a much more mature and stronger scientific evidence about the mind and the brain. All right. Any questions around it? You can put your hand up though, if you have.
But like you were saying that the perfectionism theory can't be falsified, but we can collect data of different children of their childhood experiences, and probably we can study that data.
Yes. How would you falsify?
So
You can
like
study it. There's no problem of studying. The problem is about falsification.
So like if the date we can change our observation set, like different age groups, people from different economic educational backgrounds, and if all the data have the same findings, so we can probably falsify it.
How?
Like if it can be generalized that in all possible observation sets, the childhood experiences have an influence on perfectionism or don't have an influence on perfectionism.
Yeah, so there are two things here. One is measuring childhood experiences. So unless you measure childhood experiences at childhood, you are basically basing it on your memory. And we have enough evidences of bad memory in the memory research. That's one measurement issue. Second is, how will you measure perfectionism? If you measure it by a scale, then it's the same issue that I pointed out. If you measure it to behavior, then probably you will have some effect of some kind of a, let's say, trend-based or trait-based measure of perfectionism through behavior, not through a scale. These are behavioral, these are measurement hiccups. The problem is you can generalize it. Generalizability is different. Like for example, in induction, you see 40 people who have measured this, who have stated to have this kind of childhood experiences, do rate high on a perfectionism scale. Fine. To falsify it, what will you need to do?
So probably
Generalizability and falsifiability are different.
Like to falsify, we have to consider a wider observation set. Like most of the people are included in that.
No, but what do you
So
have to do to falsify? One thing only you have to do. You have to prove this false, right? So you have to find one single instance where this does not hold true. So you need one instance where X kind of childhood experience does not, lead to that kind of a person scoring high or low, whatever, on the perfectionist scale. That's how you have to falsify it.
but then, sir, it would also depend on person to person. Like some would have an experience and some would not.
That's why I was saying that this is a problem. I mean, this was one example of a problem to falsify. It's hard to falsify some of these claims.
Yes.
Right? But the point I was trying to emphasize is both outside psychology and inside psychology, we have instances and examples of claims and theories which are very hard to falsify. But they are bad, at least according to Karl Popper, because falsifiability is the hallmark of science. And if you want to have a scientific psychology, you need the statements to be falsifiable, which is a great idea. I mean, if you think about it, and this, of course, Karl Popper was not talking about social science or about psychology. He was talking about science in general. But it makes it much more harder for social sciences because of the huge variety of noises that is there both in the system and outside the system. But the philosophical position does not change because of that. I mean, just because something is hard, you cannot say I will not do it, or I will not try to do it at least. Okay, so let me proceed. Let's take one more of a more realistic example. How do you find the reason for car accidents? Okay, so according to Popper, you have to explore all possible causes, right? And if understanding possible only when all explanations have been explored and falsified. So as an example, you have to search for evidence that, for example, does wearing sandals instead of shoes contribute to increased chance of accidents? We can get objective data about it. Does using mobile phones contribute to increased chance of accidents? We can again get objective data about it. It's hard, but you can get it. Now, to be able to falsify, and of course you can say why and what does it say about the mind and all that stuff, but to be able to falsify, you have to show, say for example, my hypothesis is using mobile phones contribute to increased chance of accidents. Can you falsify this? How do we know whether this is true or not? A lot is written about it, but is this statement true or not? I mean, is this a scientific claim that I can bet on or not? That's how you have to think about science.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. So how do we falsify this statement, or how do we try to falsify this statement?
So by collecting data that proves this false.
And
by
do
conducting
you
an
think?
experiment with a person with a person using his mobile phones.
Okay. Then
So, but again, after conducting the experiments, we still can't quantify it exactly because because it may vary from person to person how much multitasking can he do. Even if it's not a good thing to multitask, that is driving while using a mobile phone, which can risk in a car accident. Some people might exist who can do this easily. So we can't really judge on the basis of data itself too.
no. So two things, and
But
these are one of the myths that I want to break about psychology before we move ahead. Individual differences will be existing, okay, but we still want some kind of common understanding about how the human mind works. So if we do this individual thing too much, we don't want to have a science of 3 billion people. We want to have one science which explains 1 billion at least. And there are enough amount of similarities between people for us to build a science on similarities. There are also differences among people, and we have to take care of individual differences. Like what you are saying, that some people might be good at multitasking, some might be bad. However, we want to also have a science of multitasking, which will be almost applicable to a large number of people. Otherwise, we will never have any kind of common understanding on which we can do anything about it. So, right? So you cannot say that let's build a science for, because there are 8 number of or 15 kinds of rocks. Let us build, all the rocks have different material substances. They have different amount of tenacity and porousness. So all the rocks are going to behave in their own way. Yes, some part of it is true. There will be variability between them, but all rocks would follow a certain kind of Newtonian motion. We can't get away from that. So when you build a science, psychological or the science of the mind, there has to be a common understanding, common principles, and something that the whole world can trust about. Knowing that there will be deviations for some people, which we call individual differences. Because if we say everything is individual, then we will never have the science of humans. It's impossible to do. Right? And there is a lot of similarity between people in both behavior and in biology and in thinking and in enzymes and whatever not you want to think about. So there is enough amount of similarity for us to build a science about human behavior, keeping in mind that many times the behavior are in different kinds of environments and different kinds of contexts, and different people have different abilities and emotions and attention and education and whatnot. But still, that does not mean that we should have, because we have 2 billion people, we should have 2 billion psychologists. There are also people who say this is Indian psychology, this is Canadian psychology, this is, European psychology. That's also again a big problem. Right. So there has to be some kind of balance in what we are saying. Otherwise, what you are teaching in IIT Delhi, if that's not applicable in, let's say, in Boston, or it's not applicable in Tokyo, then what can we teach? This is a huge issue, and there has to be one common understanding across people, but don't overdo it and say this is how every single person on the earth behaves under every single environmental pressure.
Sir,
Okay,
these scientific researches are based on the theory or based on the data from the people. That so, example of the caffeine coffee.
See, data and theory cannot exist separately, right? There is always a crosstalk between data and theory. Science, and this is not, of course, only true for psychology, for any science, that any form of empiricism, empirical measurements, require you to do measurements and form your theory, base the theory to retest the measurements, and go back and update the theory. That happens across all sciences, including psychological science. So it's not one over the other, or you can't really even separate one from the other. And you can't place one before the other also. Eventually theories fall, theories change. Data is sacrosanct. But the problem is data or measurement of data many a times is governed by the theoretical metaphysical positions you are holding about the data, the kinds of instruments that you're using, the kind of contextual variables that you are controlling or not controlling, and many other facets about it. So no measurement, and this, by the way, comes from physics, not from some science. No measurement, and sorry, I'm stepping ahead, that's there in my next slide, but no measurement is completely objective. You cannot have it. And I'm sure you studied that in high school even. You remember our pendulum example, and I have more to that again. that we discussed in the last class. But we try to be, having some amount of objectivity using multiple means, but not a single measurement is completely objective. Physical measurement, forget measuring the mind. All right. But see here, this is a slightly more issue is there. It says using mobile phones contribute to increased chance of accidents. So here, this is a probabilistic statement. It is saying that if you do not use mobile phones, you have X probability of an accident. If you use microphones, that X increases to delta X. Okay. Now think about it. Can we falsify it or not? Is it a good hypothesis to go about testing it or not?
If we are saying that even one accident is happening because the person was using a mobile phone, then we are proving that if we wouldn't have been using the phone, the accident would not have happened. So yes, this is true. Mobile phones contribute to increased chance of accidents.
Yeah, but can you falsify this? Then you know that this is a good. See, the other way to think about whether this is a good scientific hypothesis is to ask the question, does this allow me to falsify it?
Sir, to think of this, we know that the statement is if we use mobile phones, then there are accidents. We can think of the statement as this. So this is equivalent to the statement that if there are no accidents, then
No. Hold on. This is not equivalent to the statement saying if we use mobile phones, we will have accidents.
There are chances of accidents.
Sir, I think this statement cannot be falsified because, for example, if we let a person riding a car, let him use the mobile phone. So if he has an accident, we can say that this statement holds true and the chance was increased. If he doesn't have an accident, we can say it was just a chance. So it did not happen. So we cannot falsify it.
So as you've said that it is a probabilistic situation, so sir, we can always find a fixed percentage of people who have suffered no accident even though they were using mobile phones. So in that fixed percentage of people, which would be essentially less than the, which would be comparatively less. So on that sample space, out of that sample space, on that group of people, we can falsify it.
So this can be done only with the help of the data analysis. We observe the some accident and check that how much people are using the mobile phone at the driver's seat at the time of accident. We can't falsify it by the theory directly.
What do you mean theory?
Means by simpler thought making process or something by.
No, so sorry. I mean, good that you made up this word. I mean, mentioned this word theory. So theory, at least in sciences, and I'm sure that's true for other sciences, but also in psychological science, theory is given or comes in in being typically from data. Or you can have a theory which, at least a good theory, will be able to either stand or fall in front of data. There are examples, good examples of bad theories or theories which are not testable in psychology and in many other areas, but a good one will be testable. Otherwise, it will use certain words which basically you cannot measure. But this statement, so if, for example, you use data, don't think that using driving data is not a part of psychology. A lot of people now do data modeling and big data analysis to understand human behavior. And a lot of work in mobility and driving research actually uses data, real life data, because driving is a real life behavioral activity, which includes a lot of psychological processes. So if you use data from actual driving behavior, that's one of you suggested, that is very much a part of psychology. It's not a problem. You can also do or plan an experiment to test this out. That's also very much a part of psychology.
Sir, I have an interesting experiment about that. Can I say?
Yes, please go on.
Sir, like we will have a VR, like virtual reality, like environment, and we will place a chair on where like we will drive a car in the game. Okay. And then we will place apparatus on like brain, like magnetic resonance imaging, and we will measure the electrical impulses on the like part which are controlling the handling of the that vehicle, and we will also focus on the brain part which is like controlling the mobile phone actions. So if we are getting if the electrical impulses are getting deviated on the side of the controlling balance, so we will say that yes, mobile phones contribute in increased chance of accidents.
So interesting. I was planning not to talk anything about brain in the course, but I think I should for at least 1 week or so. So yeah, this is a good idea. The only thing I would add to that is, um, even without the brain, um, the brain signals, you can just do a behavioral task where you ask people to drive, let's say in a driving simulator,
Yes, sir.
and you program the driving simulator where in a couple of runs, so you imagine, like, typically think of this like NFS, or even as just a driving simulator where you learn to drive a car,
Forza
or
Horizon.
even if you are anything, and there you tweak it where, let's say, the person does it for 20 times, and out of
Yes, sir.
that, about 5 times there's a phone call,
Yes, sir.
and we just measure the behavioral aspects about driving, including sudden speed ups, and maybe moving out from the road, or if you put certain random objects in the simulator, then whether that person is bumping into or not, even forgetting about the brain completely, still you can compare the 10 trials here versus the 10 trials here and see whether it does contribute or not. The problem is one. In one instance, there is no interference. In one, there is an interference. Now, the interference is the mobile phone. To make this even more solid, you need a third condition where there will be an interference, but that interference will not be a mobile phone. Let's say somebody else who is sitting on the seat beside and calling your name. Then we will know whether it is interference that causes accidents, or it is interference because of mobile phones that causes accidents. Okay, so that is how you start building up a solid science. Okay, so how would you do this one? Sandals versus shoes contribute to increased chance of accidents. I've heard this often. People talk about. Is this true? Similar method, any other way?
We can check it by taking surveys, sir, I think.
Yeah, surveys is another legitimate way of how people do research in psychology. Surveys have this added advantage that it enables people to say what they really experience themselves, and also it helps us capture some kind of personal experiences, which comes in handy many a times. It also gives us a way to capture attitudes and opinions, which again is helpful many a times, including, let's say, pre-poll and post-poll large-scale surveys that are run in our country. But surveys has a disadvantage, which is you never know if people are lying. You never know whether people are giving responses that you want to hear. You also never know whether people's responses are random or not. Well, random you can still control to some extent by design, but it has this issue of having you to completely trust what your participant is saying. So there is no way to judge the quality of response based on the stated experience of that person. So if that person says yes, you believe it's yes. If that person says no, you believe it's no. You can't do anything beyond that. And that's true for almost all methods. Even experimental methods have the disadvantage that it completely limits yourself to what you are doing in that experiment, and it's very narrow many a times, studying only one single aspect. So every single method would have its advantage and disadvantage, and we will have more to talk about methods as we proceed. But let me pick this up. I think this is uh, the biggest myth or issues that we have to overtake to move forward, which is the objectivity versus subjectivity debate. And relatedly, is psychology a science? Let's go one by one. So is psychology a science? Somebody who says no, can somebody quickly say that it's not a science? Don't worry that it is a psychological course. I mean, I don't care. You just say what you think is right, and of course you can um, update your opinions and positions as we know more and more. Nobody thinks it's not a science? That's strange. Most classes, many students tell me no, it's not. With that justification, of course. All right, so maybe I don't know why. Is psychology subjective? Are there a couple of hands or no hands? I don't know. Okay, a couple of hands. Yes, somebody can schedule them one after another. Pallavi, can you help?
So there's only one hand up right now, Jivesh.
Oh, okay. It's strange. These are the most obvious ideas of people. Yes, Jivesh, tell me.
Sir, I believe that psychology is not strictly a science, as we do not have a good understanding so far of, at least on a basic level, what goes on. Also, lots
What
of
do you
our
mean by basic level?
in other theories such as say chemistry is a science, and we can go on to say what goes on at a basic level, like in between atoms, molecules, and so on. At least we have an understanding of what it is made up of. But in psychology, we do not have a good idea of how and what goes on in the brain, and thus we try to give an answer using observations that we observe at a very large scale and without a much basic understanding. Also, as far as my opinion is concerned, I believe it is not a science because, as you already said, that the theories are largely not falsifiable, and lots of different kinds of things come up, such as assuming that a person's behavior remains constant throughout. Like assuming that a rock push will continue to move is understandable, but assuming that a person would react in a similar manner over a range of different times the person is asked to perform the same action, I don't think that it is reasonable. And thus,
Okay.
since results that are inferred cannot be used again and again, I don't think we can call it like a science.
So yeah, good points. Does anybody else have to add something?
So one more student has written in the chat, Kulveer has written, it's not science, but it's scientific.
I don't know what that means. Can you elaborate, please? Whoever has written that.
Kulveer.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Uh, Sir, science is more like studying nature and world, physical world, and like this. But psychology is like understanding of mind and lit stuff. But I
Okay.
understand that. So like, but yeah, we can say it's also a science. I'm contradicting myself.
It's all right. I mean, these are hard questions. In fact, these are the hardest questions, where psychologists themselves debate among themselves. So clearly, and with the world outside.
Sir, uh, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I would instead say that it's a pseudoscience in some sense. We are applying the scientific method by testing our claims, but the method which we are applying is based on human nature, based on people, like surveys and like what the human brain thinks of. There's no um, rigorous mathematical foundation behind it, as compared to the other subfields in science. So even if we are thinking scientifically, in some sense, but it's not exactly a rigorous science, I would say.
So do we need a mathematical foundation for something to be called a science?
Uh, I mean, because a mathematical foundation cannot be be changed on a person's experience as he goes through his lifetime, right? The person's brain, it can be with the new experiences he has in his life, he or she can look at the world with a different perspective as he or she looked some years before. But if there is a concrete foundation, that foundation cannot be changed even if he has more experience. So that is why it is a rigorous framework is required for a thing.
Okay, so let me start answering couple of things. So I'll start with the latest one, which is yours. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Sir, I'm Agaz Mahanjan. Agaz.
Okay. Gosh, okay. See, this is a problem. So think about AI. Okay. And whatever all the 3 or 4 of you said, this is very much the common understanding of psychology, and I will not defend or offend any of that, but I will give you perspectives to think about at this stage of the course, and you will think about it as we progress and come out of it as whatever you think is the position after the end of the course. Of course, this course is also colored by 2 people because there are 2 instructors. That's one side of it, but it's fine. Anyway, so one problem that I see in your way of presenting it is AI. Is AI scientific or science? Akash? Was it Akash? Or?
Sir, Agaz. Yeah.
Agaz. Yeah. Is AI science or scientific or none?
Well, AI is actually just trying to model the human behavior. So, in but AI has some rigorous like methods. It follows a methodical manner. So I would classify that into a science or a scientific.
Okay, fair enough. Right. So let's say I'll give you a concrete example. We have a very. Which year are you all in, by the way? Second year.
Second.
Okay. So I don't know, either you know or you will know eventually that there are different classes of neural networks that get modeled in AI. And one kind of neural networks have multiple layers in between, the input layer and the output layer. And the problem with sometimes they're also called deep neural networks. The problem is many a times we can't really explicate the process that transform the input to the output. And this input can be as simple as, let's say, a face. The output could be whether this emotion versus that emotion, or whether I know this face or I don't know this face. This is the most common usage, but it can also model more complex behaviors. There, what they're trying to do, and at least one group of people in AI are trying to do, is trying to enable the neural network to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate different kinds of contexts so that it models how we as humans can have similar kinds of processes at very different contexts. So for example, let's say I want to make a risky decision. You don't want to say, I now have a mathematical model where I can model a risky decision only for instance A. You want to have a model, at least a neural network model, where that can explain how I make a risky decision when I am in state A, when I'm state in B, when I'm in state C, and vice versa, and likewise. So we want flexibility. Flexibility actually becomes one of the hallmarks of biological systems, and humans are one of the biological systems. In fact, all of biological systems, all animal systems, one hallmark of animal systems is that we are flexible, or we can intelligently act based on changing adaptable constraints of the environment. So we do want to understand behavior which is not completely hardwired, but is flexible enough to changing demands and changing permutations of the environment. Can we model that? Yes.
Okay.
If modeling it means that we have to make the model flexible enough, and that typically in neural networks is done by free parameters. Of course, too much of free parameters is bad. So you don't want to have a model which is completely haphazard, right? You want to have some kind of coherence, but at the same time, some amount of flexibility. Now, having different behaviors at different times is a part of intelligence. It does not mean that it is completely noisy. It does mean that it is complex to model, but it's not impossible to model. Some of the previous um, interest to do it in 80s and 70s have failed when they wanted to solve the general problem solver, or they wanted to have the broad AI initiative, and when they also built cognitive architectures that can do all kinds of model all kinds of human behavior. None of them could. That is true. But the interest to mathematically model human behavior is very much a part of psychology. Psychology is not completely about having surveys and about doing interviews. This is a wrong conception of psychology. Psychology has multiple streams in it, and multiple positions in it, and multiple strands in it. And these are two of them, two method wise, not philosophically wise. So there are this, and the mathematical psychology, for example, is a small but very active research group in psychology. Similarly, social psychology is there, cognitive psychology is there, neuropsychology is there, and some overlapping areas with robotics and AI is also there. So now psychology has become much more broader than what many people think of it to be, as far as the explainability part is concerned. The other part that somebody else mentioned previously is the relationship between chemistry, for example. Now, chemistry is a great example, but then even in chemistry you have different strands of chemistry. So for example, when you study organic chemistry, you have different metaphysical positions. When you study inorganic chemistry, you have different, and when you're physical, you have different. But the good part about chemistry is the definitions are well defined, the measurements are well defined. So I can anytime go and take the same measurement in chemistry. Psychology being more of having roots with philosophy initially when it came about, and also becoming commonsensical talk, including everybody thinking to understand or everybody thinking to use psychological terms, has not yet been very well defined as far as terms are concerned. That, I think, is one point which makes it a problematic thing for us to measure. But when it comes to the subjective nature of things, you can't disregard subjectivity. Subjective is the nature that we want to study. So neuroscience, for example, cannot be devoid of subjectivity. Although we somehow think that neuroscience is objective, it's not. In fact, the whole area of neuropsychology, which uses neurological methods to study psychological phenomena, does not make it more objective or more subjective in nature. Because eventually what you're studying is a subjective experience. There is no, getting away from it. And that is what is the subject matter of psychology. So because the matter itself is subjective, which is essentially experiences, whether you mathematically model it, or whether you neurologically study it, or whether you have a computational neurological model based on neural firings, that is not going to change the nature that you're studying, which is a subjective experience at the end of the day. So how do you achieve it? And this, many of you rightly pointed out, is a problem, because everybody can have their own subjective interpretation of things, their own answers to things. So how do we come to some kind of coherence? That answer comes in the reliance on intersubjectivity, which means that if I ask you, is this color blue? You will say yes if I show you blue. If I ask 100 other people in your batch, is this color blue? Assuming there is no color blindness, let's say 80, 98 or 97% of people say yes, it's blue. Then I can then look at how people perceive the color blue as a psychological phenomena. And I know that everybody, people are not hallucinating because there is intersubjectivity, which means your blueness is subjective. My blueness is subjective. 98 other people's blueness is subjective. But when we are put together, all the 100 bluenesses has objectivity in it through multiple subjectivity. So that's why it's called intersubjectivity. 100 people's subjectivity together makes something objective, because you cannot get the experiential or you cannot get the subjectivity out of psychology. The only way to achieve objectivity is through intersubjectivity. This idea does not come from psychology really, it comes from the idea from philosophy of mind, but this is the crux of it. And that is why we need multiple measurements, multiple participants, multiple people, because we want to rule out individual subjectivities and achieve intersubjectivity across people. All right. Let me take this up and then. So all of science is informed by values. Nothing is completely objective. This is by Thomas Kuhn, again a philosopher, great philosopher actually. So all of science, remember, this is not psychological science. All of science, whether it's earth science, whether it's physical science, is informed by values. What you measure is somewhat driven by the psychological theorizations before you, the kind of measurements you use, the kinds of metaphysical positions from which you come, and what you believe in. That is why even in physics we have seen there are different decades of physics where different kinds of values were used to do the measurements. And here Kuhn is talking about physics and chemistry, by the way, not of psychology. And the other part is scientists are humans and hence influenced by values, personal cultural variables, experiences, opinions, beliefs, etc. There's also a political part to it, which Dr. Yashpal may or may not touch upon. Many of these measurements are also politically colored. They come from different vantage points. They come from different political orientations. Political, I mean, not like party. This is about, where you think that this is the best way to do it. Here you have more money, so you have bought a certain kind of an equipment when you could not have bought that kind of an equipment and other stuff. But this is very important. There is a difference between facts. Facts are not debatable. This is information about the world, and values, which is beliefs about the way the world is or should be. Now, science is supposed to be about facts, but many philosophers have pointed out that it converts to something about values, because many of the values get into discovering the facts. So, it's not trivial to say that science is truly objective. I think we made some progress about scientific method, and you agree that scientific method has certain kinds of characteristics, including having a reliance on mathematical formalism. You're right. Which also has to have some kind of falsification. That's also right. You should also have some amount of pre-decided procedure, so that tomorrow you don't say, okay, I'm measuring attention, but you don't tell me how you're measuring attention. Your measurement of attention and my measurement of attention should be in public domain, so that the way you measured, I also can go and measure. That's also right. But still, if you do all that, still, most of science need not necessarily be truly objective, although we think it is. That's what Thomas Kuhn had said, and this is probably true for all of people. The other important part is when you study a psychological phenomena, please remember that there are different levels of analyzing it. You can look at it from a social or cultural perspective. You can look at it from a purely behavioral perspective. Cognitive is when you try to hypothesize something about the mind and about how different kinds of mental processes happen to explain behavior, which is slightly lower in explanation, lower in the sense more deeper than behavioral. And then you can explain through the biological level, which explains the cognitive. So you can go from top, which you can go from social to behavioral to cognitive to biological about the same phenomena that you're going to study. You can also move up. You can move from biological or neuroscientific to cognitive to behavioral and then to social. So this is an example of cramming for test, which was the example I took in the previous class. So if you want to study how presence of others like teachers or matter, how family structure matters, how where you study matters, the cultural norms, the learning systems of schooling, all of that matters, whether or not you cram for the test. You are studying cramming for the test from a social and cultural perspective. The same phenomena, but from a social and cultural perspective. If you are studying, let's say, how long is the study period, what is the timetable, what's the social stress that causes you or does not cause you to cram, you're studying it from a behavioral perspective. If you're studying what information people attend to, what are the memory traces that get formed, what are the memory models that you can design, how and what explain your ability to focus, what are the exact decision strategies you decide to pick which information you want to cram and which you don't want to cram, that is more from a cognitive perspective or a cognitive level. If then you go on and say, okay, which brain areas are active when I cram versus I don't cram, which is through fMRI, what's the genetic markup of people, probably some genes get more expressed for those who like to cram, those who are not, what kind of neural connections exist in the brain for those who cram, what are the different biochemical pathways, what are the hormonal structures in the brain, what are the, let's say, neurotransmitters that get released, then you're studying it from a biological perspective. So the same phenomena, cramming for the test, is a psychological phenomena that can be studied from all the 4 different psychological possibilities of study. I have not given mathematical here. Any of this stuff you can model mathematically if you like to. There are some people who are doing formalizations and formal mathematical stuff to explain any of these phenomena. By the way, there is great work in economics who have explained social phenomena mathematically. There's a lot of social phenomena that's explained mathematically, and you would call it purely objective. No, it's not. The phenomena is a social phenomena. So there is subjectivity in it, but you can have a mathematical model to explain it. Similarly for behaviorals and for cognitive and for biological. In fact, for biological, you now have a whole new area called computational neuroscience, which does a computational or mathematical neuroscience. For your cognitive, you have cognitive neuropsychology, you have mathematical cognition, and stuff like that. And similarly for behavioral, you have mathematical psychology and neuropsychology and things like that. Okay. So this is what it is, and we'll just stop here. If there are some more questions I can take, but this is what it is. You have to study a phenomena. The phenomena is a psychological phenomena. All psychological phenomena is eventually subjective in nature, but you can have objective means to study it, including formal ways. However, please pre-decide the level in which you are studying it, and accordingly, you are going to focus on certain aspects versus not certain aspects. Okay, that's where I will stop. I can take a couple of questions if you have. Yes.
So, in the page that you showed, there were decision strategies. So what is the meaning of that?
Sorry, what did you say? Could you please repeat the question?
So I wanted to ask that just the page that you showed just before, there was written decision strategies. So what is the meaning of decision strategies being cognitive?
Oh, so no, decision strategies are not cognitive. You study decision strategies if you study cramming for the test from a cognitive perspective or from a cognitive level. So decision strategies means, so you all do it, right? So you all decide whether this is the information or this is the chapter or the section that you want to cram up, or do you want to skip, or you just want to, brush through. So in one of my previous classes, I'd asked students like you all to come up with a kind of a computational algorithm to decide which is the topics that has high priority to be asked in the test. And they came up with that. So it was a computational algorithm that was trying to explain people's and students' decisions about which topics to read in more detail and which topics to skim over and which topics to avoid before an upcoming test. And that is what I mean by having a, a computational or a formal way to talk about cognitive.
Sani? No, no. पढ़ा के रहे नो ना बेरो
Guys, if you are not talking, then please mute yourselves. There's so much of noise everywhere. I know many of you have to have multiple other sources of noise around you, but just for everybody. Okay, so is this clear? Any other questions from anybody else?
Sir, Kushank is asking about if there's any memo today.
No, there isn't. So, I mean, we are just keeping the first starting weeks a little more discussion oriented because we want to have some kind of a common understanding before we proceed. So after that, we will go in more detail. Oh, so where to study? You should just end up reading the NOVA link that was suggested before, but we will now give you some kind of textbooks also because if you want to read in more detail about some of the topics in case some of you are interested. To